You guys have to stop talking about pine points. You guys have to stop talking about cashing them in. Like, do not store up earthly treasures. You gotta store up... Oh, wait a minute. I don't believe in heaven. Good gum. Tasty. Gotta support new apologists. This is from the Deflate channel. The title is "The Problem of Evil Assumes God's Existence." Let me hang on. Let's do that. Let's go there. Yeah. Okay. So this is 2 weeks old. This channel, at least as far as putting things in, and we have here, what is Deflate? It's a Christian channel. Why is there no meaning in atheism? Why evolution does not support atheism? The problem of evil assumes God's existence. You notice with a lot of these Christian channels, if it weren't for atheists, they would have nothing to talk about. But the same can be said of me. Without Christians, I would have nothing to talk about. But there's always Mormons. And speaking of Mormons, I was talking to one on Twitter just a few minutes ago, and he said, I know that this is true because of a personal experience. No, you don't. You do not doubt those spiritual personal experiences. Why? Because you believe there's right and wrong, and some people use that same method to say that they're right and you think they're wrong, and vice versa, and times 1,000. Hey, Jeff Lewis, thank you for the donation. I appreciate it. Doubt your personal experiences. But without atheism, a lot of these Christian channels, all I can say is you're welcome. And for other atheist type YouTubers out there, you're welcome. We're giving you something to talk about. And but let's get right into it. I want to dive into this one first.
Oftentimes, you'll hear atheists claim that if God exists...
Hang on, let me make it look pretty. Oftentimes, you often hear atheists say, let's rewind that.
Oftentimes, you'll hear atheists claim that if God existed, there would certainly be...
One more thing. Ranch Elder, thank you so much for being here first. 1,000 Pine Points, even though you're not storing up your treasures here on Earth. 1,000 Pine Points to you.
Be no evil such as massacres, wars, child abuse, cancer, and what have you. Now, the problem of evil is a serious and complex one.
Yes, and the problem of evil does not apply to atheists. The problem of evil, in this case, is a problem for Christians. There is no problem of evil for atheists. I would admit that. It's right now, basically, I'm willing to concede all this. And I know even for some atheists, this makes them feel a little icky. But yes, we are just animals. And yes, we have vocal cords. And when we see things that we don't like, or when our community doesn't like, we call that evil. And when we see things that we love, or our community loves, or our country loves, we call that moral and good. We have vocal cords. We're animals that can just articulate certain actions, and then we give those actions labels. So the problem of evil, pain, suffering, is no problem at all. It can be explained by, hey, we evolved through natural selection, millions of years, trial and error, and just like chimpanzees can both love each other and kill each other, we are like that. Now, so basically, I want you guys to note how he tackles the problem of evil that a lot of atheists bring up. He tackles it by basically just talking about how atheists can't account for evil. And my advice is, just for guys like this, just say, you're right, but let's talk about your worldview now. And then watch him. You know, I haven't gone fishing very often, but you take a fish and put it on a dock. You know how they flap? That's what happens to apologists or Christians when you talk about evil, and they're like a flapping fish.
And I will certainly not be able to cover all its aspects in one single video. But the one thing you will learn in this video is why it is the height of inconsistency for an atheist to even talk about the problem of evil.
Yeah, that's incorrect. Like I was almost tempted to call this video Good Doug and Bad Doug, because the bad Doug in me just wants to call this guy an idiot. The good Doug in me, if I was to meet him personally, I would say, look, I understand where you're coming from. I understand that you believe without God, we can't even use terms like good and evil. But just please realize that when atheists or non-Christians are talking about the problem of evil, we're doing an internal critique. And then you kind of just look in their face and see, like, I just bought a dog, a German Shepherd puppy, and you know how they kind of go like this? Just wait to see if the Christian does like that. Like, what do you mean by internal critique? But if he doesn't do that, then that means, okay, I know what an internal critique is. Gotcha. And basically, I've already watched this video. Basically, this video is now done if he agrees with that it's an internal critique. And then you basically talk about this specific deity, what he desires, wants, wishes, calls moral, and so forth.
That's because on the assumption of atheism, the notion that there is a
Yes, Eddie the Atheist, good point. You're invited. Mr. Deflate, I don't know your real name. You're basically anybody who I do a critique on, most of the time, is welcome on my channel, but not all the time.
dichotomy between good and evil is as delusional as the notion that green unicorns and pink dragons race against each other around planet Earth.
Good graphics.
This is Lucas from...
He should not have called his... I don't know. I don't think he should have called his channel Deflate. Because I could have easily made the title of this video Deflating Christianity. But I guess he's viewing this as deflating atheism and he's going to just focus on atheism mostly. I don't know.
From Deflate, countering the skeptics' objections to Christianity. If you're new here, click that subscribe button to get our upcoming videos. So
always important.
Let's start with a couple of basics. On atheism, we are just one among the many thousands of species which evolved from that one common ancestor cell which crawled out of the prebiotic soup some 4 billion years ago.
Mostly correct.
That is, just like snails, rats, sharks, and butterflies, we fight for survival as described by Darwin's beautiful theory of evolution.
Basically, one thing I've noticed throughout my years of doing this is when a Christian uses the word Darwin in the conversation of evolution, you know how fundamental or how conservative they are. The more they use the word Darwin, the more conservative and fundamentalist they are.
Now, of course, somewhere along the way, we miraculously picked up a mind.
We miraculously picked up a mind somewhere along the way. You can tell this guy... it's like, okay, we were an ancestor, a Neanderthal maybe, or something prior to that. And also one day we picked up a mind. But I'm sure this guy is defining mind as a soul-infused thing with free will and it's immaterial and not just a brain. But he's showing a picture of a brain, so maybe he means brain when he says mind.
Language, the capacity to create art, literature and music, but never mind, we're just another species more or less on par with guinea pigs.
More or less on par with guinea pigs.
Mushrooms and chimpanzees.
Mushrooms. We are more or less on par with mushrooms. Now, even though I believe life here on Earth evolved through a common ancestor, like that is just, what's the word? Should Bad Doug come out? That's just cheap, dirty parlor tricks to say something like we're more or less on par with a mushroom. No, we are complex, highly evolved, very rational most of the time, or some of the time. The capacity to be very rational organisms. I guess we're animals. See, this is the thing. I'm going to take a little detour here. Some Christians would never leave Christianity because they need to feel special. They don't want to be viewed as just an animal, They want to be more special than this chimpanzee that you're looking at. And if they can't feel that specialness, their anxieties go up. There's a lot of people who suffer from anxieties. And if they don't feel special, then they get these negative feelings in them. So even as an atheist, I can tell Christians listening, if you're on the fence and thinking about leaving Christianity, but this is one of your problems, it's like, no, you are special in terms of compared to a chimpanzee or a mushroom, you are way more special. In fact, let me see. This is something that I forget where I got this from. Could have been Sam Harris. But we as a species, the Homo sapiens, we can look at these things and we can say, you know what? We can rank these as how special they are. A dolphin is way more special than a hamster, is way more special than a butterfly, it's way more special than a leaf, is way more special than a rock. You notice that as the species get more intelligent, more rational, more capable of feeling pain and so forth, we deem them more like ourselves and we place more value on them. So just because you leave Christianity doesn't mean you have to leave this whole idea that you're special. But I would say that in the big scope of things, in the vastness of the universe, and even 1,000 years from now, this is the problem. A lot of people can't take this. It's like the last person to remember your name, which is probably going to be your great-grandchild if you have children. After that, you're gone. And I understand why that anxiety really creeps up on you. But it's okay. It's the same thing as a million years before you were born. You didn't have that anxiety. You weren't concerned about what people thought about you because you didn't exist. And in the same way in the future, that will be the case.
That's why Rationality Rules would frequently start his video like this.
Why, hello, my fellow apes. I hope that you're well.
Now, what is interesting is that atheists usually don't complain about there being a problem of evil in the animal kingdom.
Right, and we don't complain that there's a problem of evil in the human kingdom, in the Homo sapiens. It's an internal critique.
I mean, I have never heard anyone talking about humpback whales committing atrocities when swallowing tons of krill. Nor have I ever heard an atheist being outraged at the fact that among certain kinds of apes, males unjustly commit rape and infanticide when they copulate with females by force and kill off their offspring.
Yeah, that's another thing I think maybe even some atheists feel a little icky about admitting. That, 300,000 years ago, our ancestors, they probably didn't ask permission to have sex with the opposite sex. Basically, every form of reproduction was non-consensual. Well, I shouldn't say that, but at some point we developed vocal cords, and so there wasn't this whole idea of, I guess we could use hand signals. No, stay away. Your back is not hairy enough. Get away from me. Now we like sleek black backs, but yeah, but that's the truth, right? If it's true that we evolved from ancestors, this shows that morality has evolved just like we have. What we call moral, what we call immoral. And even Christians, I think, admit this when they use terms like new covenant and old covenant.
Why the silence? Well, when whales eat krill, they're just fighting for survival. And when male apes force themselves on females and kill their kids, well, they're just propagating their genes. That's simply the beauty of natural selection, taking its wondrous course.
I'm not sure about this. I'm not a zoologist, but I play one on YouTube sometimes. I actually had to take I have a zoology minor in undergraduate school. But I do think this is true. I think that in certain higher evolved primates, chimpanzees, for example, the tribe will see bad behavior and expel and even kill that individual chimpanzee when it misbehaves, just like we do, or we lock them up or whatever. And then there's other ways I think they encourage good behavior within the tribe.
Course, as Darwin said. So from whales and apes back to us humans, though again, according to Rationality Rules and his fellow atheists, there is no real difference anyway. Now here's the rub. Atheists claim that we are just another kind of animal, fighting for survival. However, when apes in the jungle kill babies and force themselves on their females, atheists are happy to put this into the magic trunk of Darwin's evolution, as their never questioned dogma, which supposedly explains
never questioned dogma. Ugh. This is like, the bad Doug in me says like, you guys have heard me say this, that doesn't matter where you're coming from. Assume people with some an idea or views the opposite of yours is going to strawman you. That's the default position. But this is taking it to another level. Like there's many scientists who question certain aspects of evolution, but I think over the broad spectrum of scientists in many different fields and so forth, that common descent is accepted. And the thing is, he's talking like atheists are the only ones that believe or accept evolution. Like that's false. There's probably more. In fact, I'm quite sure that there are more Christians who accept evolution than not. I could be wrong about that, but I think the Pope has said, yeah, go ahead, accept evolution. And I think Roman Catholicism is the biggest version of Christianity on the planet. So
everything. That's nature taking its course according to the priests and popes of atheism. And Dawkins's followers are, of course...
See, but you know, if you're a Christian listening and the topic of the problem of evil comes up, take this guy's strategy. Like that's the best way to not have to deal with things like, I see DB Cisco in the live stream chat said, verses like, or ideas like marry your rapist and so forth in the Old Testament, and genocide in the Old Testament and so forth. This guy can just avoid all that just by placing the burden on atheists. But again, all you have to do is with a Christian like this is just say two words over and over again: internal critique. And you can even say things like, I could be wrong about everything. I'm wrong about everything. You could be right about everything. You're right about everything. Internal critique. Now let's talk about your God and why he would create hating sin, but knowing that by creating he would cause sin indirectly. Internal critique.
More than happy to blindly believe it. However, when they see the same thing happening among human apes, they ditch natural selection and the fight for survival and suddenly start ranting about evil instead. Now, how does this make any sense? Are we animals or are we not? Well, welcome to the twisted logic of irrationality rules and his fellow.
Humans are animals, but they're animals that are thinking, they're rational, and they, in the attempts to live longer and survive, they will look at things and say, oh, if I do X, that tends to cause problems for both me and the society I live in, so we're not going to do X. In fact, we'll call X evil, and we'll shame people when they do it, and when they don't do it or do the opposite, we will praise them. And by shaming and praising and giving certain things certain labels, it will lead to hopefully a better society where there's less suffering, the species can propagate and so forth. Now, interestingly enough, though, some of the criticisms against atheism has been that atheists are, in the United States at least, or in Western civilizations, they do a horrible job at reproducing. So has evolution taken a step now of going against itself by becoming a rational organism like Homo sapien? You look around and you say, oh, having too high of a population is actually killing the environment, making it tougher to get resources and so forth. Maybe we should stop having kids. That's an question or interesting thing to think about.
Low apes. Now, to be fair, some atheists are at least rational enough to recognize that none of this makes any sense. And so they try to fix up the situation a little bit. They would say that though we're animals, similar to those raping apes, evolution has miraculously endowed us with a sense of what is good and evil as a helpful adaptation.
It's same with the brain thing or the mind thing. It's just, boom, we also had this sense of right and wrong. No, it evolved very, very slowly over time.
For our species to thrive and survive, even though clearly there is no such thing as good and evil, but there's only the illusion of it.
Yeah, this is, a lot of atheists will say what he just said. There is no good and evil. There's the illusion of it. But that's because they're defining good and evil the way most theists do. And so if a theist is set in their ways, stubborn, saying, oh, yeah, the only way you can have good and evil is with a God. And you say, oh, I don't believe in a God. Then you just say, well, I don't believe in good and evil. But notice how that is almost irrelevant. It's like most Christians admit you don't have to believe in a God to act morally. So you don't even need to believe in God to do what's right to your fellow man or cause harm. If you're a Christian, you can still cause... In fact, aren't most Christians in jail? Aren't most murderers in jail believers in God? I would say yes. So it's totally irrelevant what he's saying here.
Which we took on in the process of evolution. In fact, some of the most respectable atheist philosophers make exactly these claims, such as Michael Ruse, who says, ethics, as we understand it, is an illusion fobbed off on us by our genes to get us to cooperate.
Eddie the Atheist is defending himself in the live stream chat. PineCreek, I want to procreate, but many of the hot single women in North Carolina are practicing Christians. Life is just not fair. Well, I appreciate Eddie the Atheist for not being unequally yoked, because that's a sin.
Morality, or more strictly, our belief in morality, is merely an adaptation put in place to further our reproductive ends. And so we come full circle. On atheism, evil does not actually exist, other than as a figment of our imagination.
No, not as a figment of our imagination. It is in our brains. We just call certain actions that are bad or not good for survival or cause harm evil, and the opposite good.
That's why when atheists complain about things like genocide, war crimes, or the problem of evil in general, they're basically complaining about something which, according to them, should be taken as seriously as the flying spaghetti monster. The notion that this could be considered a rational position.
He's saying that if you're an atheist, you can't really complain about genocide. If you're an atheist, you can't really say anything against someone breaking into your house and killing your kids. I mean, deflate. If you want your channel to get, well, I guess you can still, yeah. No, I was going to say if you want your channel to grow, you're going to have to stop saying ridiculous things like this. You could say like atheists have no basis for this, or they are in a contradiction with themselves. You can say stuff like this, like that, I guess. But I guess there's enough stupid people in the world that you could still grow your channel and say stuff like this.
By any stretch of the imagination, must be, I guess, one of the dogmas atheists simply embrace with blind faith. And by the way,
thanks, Eddie the Atheist.
You don't have to take my word for what I just said, because what's telling is that it is atheist philosophers themselves.
By the way, deflate guy, this is good. This is what I like what you're doing. He's trying to defend his worldview by basically not focusing on it. That's a good tactic. Number two is, let me rewind it here. You're quoting people atheists, you're alluding to the fact that they represent all atheists. Now, I'm sure you're smart enough to realize that that's not the case, but it's a good tactic to always bring up the other side's champions and say, this is what your guys are saying. I do that a lot, so that's a good tactic. But I sometimes forget to say that, of course, this doesn't represent all Christians. But I think most of the time, usually, some of the time, I do.
Word for what I just said, because what's telling is that it is atheist philosophers themselves who have admitted that on the assumption that atheism is true, their position on the issues of justice and evil are as inconsistent as anything could be. I mean, pick Bertrand Russell, for example, who, while advocating for human rights, also confessed that what he's doing does not make any sense, given that he is also an atheist. Or Joel Marx, an atheist philosopher who says, I have long been laboring under an unexamined assumption, namely that there is such a thing as right and wrong. I now believe there isn't. I became convinced that atheism implies amorality.
Yeah, and I'm not exactly sure what Joel Marx is defining as right and wrong, but does it even matter if there is something outside of ourselves, outside of the cosmos, where let's say it's true that there is this standard of objective right and wrong that's outside of Homo sapiens, outside of all humanity. What does that matter if you can't know what it is? I think the epistemology is way more important than the ontology. Because I'm an atheist who could say, yeah, maybe there is something as objective right and wrong, but got to show me why there is. Like, maybe there isn't. In fact, I don't see any evidence that there is. And if there is, how in the heck do we figure out what it is? It seems like throughout the course of human history, it seems like we've had to figure that out on our own. And don't tell me you got it out of a book, because even in that book, you would admit that we don't do certain things like that book says we did. We no longer stone practicing homosexuals. Well, not in the United States anyhow.
He goes on to say that believers are correct. Without God, there is no morality. In other words, on atheism, talking about right and wrong, as well as good and evil, is inconsistent nonsense.
It's inconsistent nonsense if you define it involving a God. Then I would agree with you. But I'd say all atheists don't define it that way.
So as long as you believe that all there is in the universe are atoms and biomolecules, which evolution has miraculously, by the wave of a magic wand, turned...
Evolution by a wave of a magic wand. I can tell that this guy is defensive about what he believes, by the way he's talking here, because he's using what he's heard, I think, from some atheists. You believe in a magical fairy up in the sky, a sky daddy, waved a magic wand or spoke the words, and poof, we got the universe. And he's just reversing it. And he's reversing it because I think he feels defensive. It's like, I am not stupid. I am not irrational. In fact, you are the stupid ones. This is almost like the I know you are, but what am I type apologetic.
Turn into apple trees, raping apes, and Homo sapiens, then you have no reason to suppose that good and evil actually exist, other than as an illusory figment of our imagination. And why would anyone care about illusions? That would be as rational as getting all worked up about whether the non-existing green unicorn or the non-existing pink dragon is winning the non-happening competition.
Okay, so enough of that. But what's the bottom line here? The bottom line here is the problem of evil, Mr. Deflate, or other Christians who support what he's saying. The problem of evil is not a problem for atheists. It's a problem for you guys. And the problem is this: you believe in a God that hates sin, yet created knowing that there would be sin, or predicting that there would be sin. You believe in a God who is benevolent, all merciful, all loving, not needy, not dependent on anything, yet desires worship, desires to create so he can have relationship, even though he's a Trinity and has relationship within himself if you're a Trinitarian. You're a God you're a Christian who believes in a God who will not step in all the time on the major things, like the gratuitous type things. In fact, on Twitter the other day, I asked a question to Christians, and if you're a Christian listening, take this hypothetical thought experiment seriously. And if you do, I think you're good. If your loved one was about to be brutally murdered, and let's assume your God exists, Yahweh, Jesus, Holy Spirit exists, but let's also assume that Superman exists. Now, given what you know about Yahweh, how he's interacted in the past, and given what you know about Superman, how he's interacted in the past, I want you to seriously try to answer this question. Your loved one is about to get hacked up with a machete knife, brutally murdered, painful death, someone you deeply love, and you can only call on one entity, one person, Yahweh or Superman. Who do you call on? And if you say anything but Superman, I'm going to call you dishonest. I think everyone answers Superman to that question. And that shows that you have a problem, that you have this all-powerful God who, on the most egregious cases, will not intervene, or at least hasn't very often. I can even take an internal critique and enter your worldview and say, yeah, he did stop that one thing. But look at the billions of cases where he did not intervene. In fact, the fact that he intervenes in some cases and not others that are egregious makes the case even worse. You're better off saying that, no, well, I believe in my God, but he never intervenes. You're better off going that way, I think. Hey, thank you, Kent Hoven, CPA. Oh, how did Kent's taxes look this year? Did he make any income? Can you get Canada to call Psi 9 home? What? He's ruining Texas. Oh, can I get Canada to call Psi 9 home? Is Psi 10 living in Texas now? Huh, interesting. How is Psi living in Texas? He needs a visa. And my guess is he doesn't have any special skills. In order for me to get my green card, it took me 5 years and $10,000 of my own money. And I had to have like several degrees. And even then it was tough. I guess maybe he got into Texas for being a pastor, maybe? I don't know. That puts something up my gitch when I hear about people getting in easier than what I had to do. But anyhow, I want to, you guys want to, let's look what another one he has here. That one was pretty bad. Let's see here. Yeah, why there's no meaning in atheism. This is a good one. Let's do this one.
I don't know how many times I've come across atheists who say that even though our universe is meaningless, one can still lead a meaningful life. Statements such as these sound nice for sure, but sounding nice is not quite the same thing as making sense. And since atheists usually take pride in their alleged commitment to rationality,
here it is. See what I'm talking about? When I've been completely honest with Christians, maybe too honest, when I say I judge you when I hear this type of things coming out of your mouth. It's like, call me irrational all day long. I'm speaking on behalf of him. Call me irrational all day long. I got the truth. Why are you atheists? You think you can hurt me? I got God on my side. But yet I hear time and time again Christians just whining and complaining about how non-Christians are attacking them and mocking them and how they call them irrational. Please don't view me as stupid. It's like that type of attitude. Hey, thank you for the donation, Paul James. Superman versus Yahweh. Make it happen, Doug. Okay, yeah. I could do a Superman versus Yahweh on my live stream.
A fishy statement such as, there is no objective meaning to the universe, but you can still create your own meaning, certainly deserves some scrutinizing.
Yeah, I'm going to commend him here. He talked about evil, and he talked about how humans are just animals, and he's appealing to a certain demographic of humans who just really feel the need to feel special from a cosmic ultimate sense. And here he's doing it again. He's appealing to a vast array of people who just really need to feel special and to have this ultimate meaning, like this thick meat on the bone type of meaning that you can just sink your teeth in and the juices just pour out with meaning. And if you're an atheist, it's just you're going to die and that's it. Is that what you want? Is that what you want to believe? But what's interesting is even if I do an internal critique and picture myself as a Christian and think about this meaning I get from God, how does it really manifest itself, this meaning? And when I think back when I was a Christian, it would manifest itself through reading God's word. I would get meaning out of that. But it was mostly the church, the community of believers. I got meaning through the help, the hugs, the camaraderie of other Christians. Isn't that interesting? It's almost like a God wouldn't even need to exist. And you could still have that, right? In fact, this is my advice when talking to a Christian about this whole idea of ultimate meaning and so forth. Bring up other religions where people are so confident that they have true meaning in their lives because of a God that they believe in, which the Christian thinks doesn't exist. So now what's the difference between a Christian who has ultimate meaning, who says they have ultimate meaning, and a Hindu who says they have ultimate meaning? The Hindu really, really believes it. The Hindu's really, really sincere. The Christian really, really believes it. The Christian's really, really sincere. So if this person can believe they have this ultimate meaning and be wrong, then the Christian can believe they have ultimate meaning and be wrong. And what does it matter? Because if they truly believe they have ultimate meaning in the cosmic sense, and that impacts them, gives them these good feelings, makes them feel special, doesn't matter if it's real or not, does it? Especially because how it manifests itself is through humans.
That's exactly what this video is about, and what you'll learn by the end of it is that any atheist talk about creating your own meaning in an otherwise meaningless universe is nothing but a grandiose exercise in self-deception.
But this is exactly what Christians do. They create their own meaning by worshiping and believing in a deity, and whether it exists or not is irrelevant. That meaning will still manifest itself. They have created their own meaning by believing that their meaning is external to themselves in a cosmic sense.
This is Lucas from Deflate countering the
Lucas, that's your name.
skeptics' objections to Christianity. If you're new here, click that subscribe button to get our upcoming videos. So let's start with a simple observation. Generally speaking, on atheism, the natural world is all there is. Reality is...
Great to have another episode. Why can some people super chat $5, but mine only does $4.99? Scott Duke asks. I don't know. Maybe someone in the live stream chat can tell Scott Duke why he can't give me an extra penny.
ultimately made up
But thank you for the donation, Scott Duke. And I still like your name.
of matter, and everything you see can be broken down into the particles of physics. This, of course, includes you as a human being. According to atheists, you're just a somewhat more complex arrangement of matter, and thus only slightly different from a brick stone.
Only slight. Hey, atheists, you're only slightly different than a brick stone.
Well, okay, unlike a brick stone, you're at least a living organism made up of cells with the ability to reproduce, but don't ever think that you're somehow special. No, just like the mosquito annoyingly buzzing over your head at night.
Am I free to psychologize him yet? Because this guy is really insecure. Either that or he's confident and he just knows how to tap into the insecurities of other Christians in order to get views and subscribers. It's like, I don't want to believe I'm just basically a brick wall, so God.
Or the mouse roaming your backyard, you're nothing but a collection of randomly mutated genes and biomolecules which natural selection graciously picked in the course of history. And that's
This is very similar to the video we just watched.
because at the bottom layer of reality is just raw matter.
Thank you for the donation, Susan Gibbard. Just checking. Yeah, the $5 works.
Matter, ever since our purposeless universe inexplicably popped into existence with neither cause nor goal. What's more,
by the way, I can't. He is smart for doing this because even though I disagree with him, I just saw, Braxton Hunter and Cameron Bertuzzi on Braxton Hunter's channel, Trinity Radio. They just did a whole episode on anxieties and maybe even depression, I forget. And if you are someone who struggles with these mental health issues, wow, like this is powerful, right? Like, how can you struggle with anxieties and live your life if there's no God? Like, you're special, you. And if there is no God, you're just like a brick wall, a collection of molecules, and therefore you're not special. And therefore, like, who cares if your wife loves you? Who cares if your mom and dad loves you? Who cares if your kids love you? Who cares if your friends love you? That doesn't matter. What matters is God loves you. This is the perception I sometimes get from Christians like this. It's like, why? Why do you need this cosmic love? I know why. And it's the same reason why you dream. Because fantasy is always better than reality. And so the love that is fantasy, that is just the most powerful love ever, you're the most special coming from this deity ever. You're just so precious. That fantasy is way more powerful than your spouse can give you, because, let's be honest, your spouse sometimes gets underneath your skin, right? But God doesn't get underneath your skin. Why? Because you've created this God in your own image. And so you're not going to create a God that, I'll take this back. Some Christians will admit that the God they worship and serve gets under their skin sometimes. Yeah, that's true. But for the most part, they view this God in very high esteem.
That universe is slowly but steadily running out of energy until it will die the so-called heat death, which will mean that at some time in the future, neither movement nor life will be possible anymore, as the universe will return to the randomness, nothingness, and meaninglessness from which it emerged in the first place.
So keep believing in God, because if you don't, your anxieties are going to go sky high.
So far, so good. I'm fully with the atheist hypothesis. But now comes the not-so-subtle atheist sleight of hand. Because instead of actually being consistent and affirming that the meaninglessness of the universe necessarily implies the meaninglessness of his or her own existence, the atheist now simply turns around and claims that you can nevertheless create your own subjective meaning.
Yeah. If the universe doesn't have purpose and meaning, then your individual life doesn't. How does this meaning manifest itself, Sir Lucas? Through words in a book, right? Through a feeling, through meditation, right? Or prayer. Through the community of other believers, right? Now, a God, hypothetically, that's the problem. A lot of Christians can't think hypothetically, or they refuse to. But hypothetically, your God may not exist at all, and all those other things are still happening around you. You're still reading this book that you think was inspired by a God, but really wasn't. You still go to church where you worship, you think that you're communing with a God, but you're really not. You still have a fellowship of believers that you think God's using them to encourage you and so forth and give you meaning in your life. You still think that there's a heaven and hell, and that whatever you do here on earth is going to be rewarded or punished when really it's not. It's this belief in your head that's giving you this meaning, even though none of it is true. And I don't know if what I just said is going to resonate with the Christian, probably not. But if you can put it in terms of that Hindu, that they have this cosmic type meaning, and purpose, and yet it's based on something false, how do you know you're not just like the Hindu, Lucas?
You may rally, for example, for some cause of social justice, devote yourself to animal rights, donate to the Richard Dawkins Foundation, or simply enjoy yourself and eat ice cream while sunbathing at the beach. Whatever you pick, it will provide you with an island of meaning in the vast ocean of...
Yeah, take your pick. You can go to a Sunday night worship service, or you can go to Wednesday night worship service. You can give to the poor thinking you're doing this because Jesus commanded you, and that's why it gives you meaning. You can help your fellow brother or sister in Christ, and that gives you meaning. You can obey this God and do what he says and believe in him and confess with your mouth in the hopes of getting eternal life. Take your pick, right?
Of our universe's meaninglessness. As I said in the beginning, while this may sound beautiful, it's not only rationally inconsistent to the highest degree, but also a ridiculous form of self-deception.
Daddy, what does irony mean? Well, son, irony means this.
The highest degree, but also a ridiculous form of self-deception. Because if the material universe is all there is, the notion that you can actually create meaning, which is of course an immaterial concept, makes as much sense as to think that you can throw a bucket into a dried up well to pull water from it. In addition, even if you could magically create meaning in a materialistic and objectively meaningless universe, this subjectively creates...
See, this is the thing. I wish Lucas was here to ask him, well, is meaning have anything to do with feelings? If he says yes, does meaning have anything to do with feelings or emotions? If he says yes to that, then he's admitting that it is at its foundation chemical, because we can measure this. We can see dopamine and rushes and different hormonal things happening within the body that changes one's feeling. I can give depressed people a drug and they feel better. Now, if he's saying meaning it has nothing to do with that sort of thing, that it's not a feeling, but it's just an ontological state of whatever, then the real question is, well, how do you know that's true? Right? And does it matter if it's true? If it's still ultimately still boils down to these feelings and emotions that give us this meaning.
Created meaning of yours would be entirely pointless. For if ultimately nothing matters, then whatever you contrive to be your purpose won't matter either at the end of the day. Let me illustrate this. Imagine we lived in a world in which healthy food does not exist, but everything we take in would cause us to become sick.
Ugh.
Now, in such a world, you are, of course,
tip, don't show pictures of people vomiting.
Free to talk about creating for yourself a healthy diet. But that would not change the fact that whatever so-called diet you pick, it will make you sick, just like any other food you could take in. In the same way, to say that the universe is ultimately meaningless, but that you can still pick some cute little diet of meaning for yourself is nothing short of delusional.
There's more irony. This is why I think religion exists. We evolved to believe in something higher than ourselves, to give us this feeling of ultimate purpose, ultimate hope, ultimate meaning, in order to behave better. It's like, some people just need to be watched in order to do the right thing. Well, what happens when nobody's watching? Well, some smart person or people 300,000 years ago said, okay, I got to go leave, son, I got to go leave and do some hunting. I got to go kill me some bison. So I'm going to leave you home here with your sister and your mother, but don't do anything bad. And because God's watching you, he knows where you've been sleeping. He knows when you're awake. He knows if you've been bad or good. And so this is why I think we have this concept of deities and gods to help us behave well. And this gives us this meaning.
By the way, you don't have to take my word for it. Check out Friedrich Nietzsche or Jean-Paul Sartre, who are
Good. This is what you should do. I don't blame you for this.
two of history's most important atheist philosophers. Nietzsche said that once you do away with God, the world will basically turn into something like an abandoned, dark, haunted marketplace where
Now, this is a testable claim. I love this. Once we abandon God, what do you say? Basically, the society will become a wasteland. This is very testable. Why don't we try it for a few years? I would say most Christians would agree that Western Europe is like godless, secular, heathens. And the United States is heading that way too. I think a lot of Christians would admit that. Canada especially. Oh, Canada. Heathen country. My goodness. And countries like Pakistan, a lot of Christians, a lot of Christian nations in Africa, some parts of Asia. Where would you rather live? Lucas, I'm talking to you. Where would you rather live? In a heathen country like Denmark or Norway? Or a Christian nation in, I don't know, Africa or even Pakistan? They believe in God. They have this ultimate meaning. I don't think for 1 second you'd want to live in those countries. I think you'd rather live in places where there isn't this ultimate meaning.
no one wants to be, as it's been completely drained of meaning. He truly lived what he preached, as he spent the last years of his life in a madhouse. Similarly, Sartre, in his play No Exit, depicted reality.
Okay, I agree with Joe D in the live stream chat that this is no longer entertaining. But I do have a backup plan. In fact, there might be a theist coming on later. He teaches apologetics, and he's been wanting to talk to me, and I've been saying, hey, can we do it now? And he says no. But there's a chance he might come later during this live stream. I doubt it, but we'll see. But there was another YouTube channel that someone wanted me to look at. And I don't know how many Christians here have heard of the Alpha Course. Let's see if I can find it. Yeah, here we go. And it's really popular, I guess. I think this guy's from Britain. Yeah. So he has several, his name is Nicky Gumble. And it's like, it's boggling to my mind how Christians use the same arguments over and over again. But I guess maybe they say the same thing about atheists on our rebuttals. Maybe they do. But I'm going to listen to a little bit of this guy. And I guess he put a question mark over this because he doesn't want people having it for free. So it tells me maybe he's in it for the money.
Is a barrister. My son qualified as a barrister. My daughter qualified as a barrister. My grandfathers on both sides were barristers. My uncle was a barrister. If we'd had a cat, it would have been a barrister.
Okay, so, for those of you from Alabama, a barrister is a lawyer.
But I didn't come from a Christian background. I wasn't brought up as a Christian. I was brought up as a barrister, not a Christian.
Okay, yeah, if for all you Christians out there who want to get into the mission field or be apologists, here's a hint. Here's a suggestion I have. Leave Christianity first for about a year and declare yourself an atheist. And then about 12 months later, then go back to Christianity, because you'll have way more credibility if you say, yeah, I was an atheist, but now I'm a Christian and I love the Lord, and I came from this lowly place of atheism with no meaning, hope, and purpose. But now I'm a Christian. I got a lot of hope, meaning, and purpose. And because if you just say, I was born and raised in a Christian home and all my family were Christians, it doesn't have that same oomph.
And my father was a Holocaust survivor. Many of his family had perished in concentration camps. He was Jewish, a secular Jew. He would have described himself as
I love secular Jews.
an agnostic. My mother was not a churchgoer, and so I didn't have any kind of Christian upbringing. But I kind of did my own investigations, and I'm just into the philosophy of life. And
I wonder if the PineCreek theorem applies to this guy.
I came to the conclusion that I was an atheist, and I was quite a vociferous atheist. I wasn't kind of proselytizing. I didn't think that other people had to be atheists. I didn't go around trying to convert other people to atheism. But if anyone tried to convert me, then I had quite a lot to say on the subject, and I was quite argumentative. And I didn't really like Christians. I was very suspicious of Christians.
Why is the logo on his face? Because he wants people to buy the logo-free version.
I come across one or two of them in my gap year between school and university, and I was deeply suspicious of them. They had these kind of smiles that were a bit odd, really. Why were they smiling like that? It seemed like they were a bit cult-like.
What's interesting is, wasn't it William Lane Craig who said that he became a Christian partly because of the smile of this cute young lady in front of him in class?
And so I avoided them, and I was sharing rooms with, I had a room next door to my great friend Nicky Lee, who we'd been at school together, and we ended up in rooms next door to each other at university. And I said to him, Nicky, whatever you do, don't let those Christians into your room. They are dangerous. But unbeknown to me,
I say just the opposite. Come on in.
He had been thinking about it quite seriously, and one evening he and his then girlfriend, now his wife Scylla, came back and they told me that they had become Christians.
Ooh. PineCreek theorem sounds like it was right, at least for his friend.
I was devastated. I mean, they were such lovely people. I thought, what can I do? I've got to help them. I don't know anything about this. I better investigate. It was late at night. I thought, what can I read?
Who's this sound like? This sounds like the British form of Lee Strobel.
So I went to my bookshelf and I found I had this old Bible that I'd had for RE at school. And that night I started reading it. I started reading Matthew's Gospel. So at the beginning of the New Testament, I just read Matthew, Mark, Luke. About halfway through John's Gospel, 3 o'clock in the morning, I fell asleep. Following morning, I carried on reading. I read all of that day, all of the next day, all of the next day. I was a student. I didn't have any work to do. And by the time I had completed the New Testament, I came to the conclusion, it's true.
Oh. I read it, I finished it, and I concluded it was true. Wow. I shouldn't be so hard on him, because C.S. Lewis wasn't much smarter. C.S. Lewis basically says he's either Lord, lunatic. No, he's either a liar, lunatic, or Lord. And I read the Gospels, and he doesn't seem like a lunatic or a liar, so he must be God. It's like you have these really great authors like C.S. Lewis coming to such terrible conclusions. And this guy comes from a family of lawyers. I'm assuming their IQs are way above average. And they read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and they close it, and they think to themselves, it's true. Someone who values truth would not do that unless there's something he's not telling us.
I didn't want to be a Christian, but I came to the conclusion it's true. Why? What evidence is there for Christianity?
Here we go.
You can't prove Christianity mathematically. You can't prove it scientifically. Science, of course, is very, very important, but science answers different questions.
Yes, Joe D., but the liar, lunatic, and Lord from C.S. Lewis is just as bad as what this guy just said.
Questions to faith. Science answers the questions when and how did this world come into being? What it can't answer is the question who and why. Let me use a visual.
And I need answers.
I've got here a cake.
Oh yeah, I've seen this. He brings out a cake.
The answer is, I made this.
brings out a cake and says, science can't tell you who made this cake. Actually, forensically, you probably could if there's a bit of his hair on it, some DNA sample. Oh, yeah, Nicky Gumble made
because
that.
it deals with the scientific questions. But equally, faith is really important because it answers some very fundamental questions about life. And everyone has...
What does he mean by faith there, I wonder? Because, I get conflicting signals from Christians. Sometimes they use faith as just meaning blindness, blind faith. And then other times they talk about faith as being confident, based on evidence.
Faith. An atheist has faith that there's no God. You can't prove that.
An atheist has faith that there is no God. Yeah, see, now he's defining atheist as someone who makes the claim that there is no God or gods.
Mathematically or scientifically.
Which some are. Some make that claim. I don't make that claim.
And those of us who believe in Jesus do so on the basis of evidence.
Okay, I want you to think of Lee Strobel's wife when he says this.
Those of us who believe in Jesus do so on the basis of evidence.
I would say the majority of the time. I'll just make it 51%. You can take that number to the bank. At least 51% of Christians do not become Christians based on the evidence. At least defining evidence as something external to you. I'm not talking about the inner testimony of the Holy Spirit, that sort of thing.
I myself could not be a Christian if it was kind of like a blind leap of faith. There was no evidence at all. You just had to believe.
Okay, he just said that he became a Christian, or he believed it was true, at least, after reading the Gospels. So he must just view the Gospels as good enough evidence to believe those claims. Words written 2,000 years ago, copied, put on a piece of paper for today, read it. Oh, so-and-so said that Jesus did this and said this. Oh, okay, it's true. There's the evidence. Just look at it.
I believe there is good historical evidence. Historical evidence is evidence. Scientific evidence is not the only kind of evidence. As a lawyer, we used what you might call historical evidence. Every time a jury brings back a verdict, they're doing it on the basis of things that happened in history.
Okay, this is going to be like a little quiz for the people in the live stream chat. I've seen this before a couple days ago. He's going to list some of the evidence. Can you predict what he's going to say? Just do it in one word, or one or two words. Just what are the types of evidence do you think he's going to talk about in the next 10 minutes or so? What's he going to say? What's the evidence for Christianity? And we'll see how close you get. In fact, if you can even, this is for bonus points, see if you can think about what is the very first piece of evidence he's going to present. That's tougher. I actually don't remember in what order he said things. I want to try to predict. I'm going to predict he's going to talk. I remember some of the things he said, but I think the first thing he's going to say is Josephus, extra biblical accounts.
Evidence of history. And every jury decision is a step of faith. And so it is that we have to make up our minds about Jesus. And that is a step of faith. I came to believe in God because of Jesus. It seems to me that the resurrection of Jesus, which I came to believe in, and we'll come back to this, strongly suggests that this world has a creator. And that creator is to be seen in terms of through the lens of Jesus. And to me, it makes a lot of sense.
Call me crazy. You're crazy, Doug. But he hasn't presented any evidence yet.
Because if there's a God, and God wanted to reveal himself, you can't get to know someone unless they reveal himself. No one can get to know you unless you reveal yourself.
If there's a God, he would want to reveal himself. He would want to reveal himself in the way of Gabriel, the angel, in a cave. If there's a God, he would want to reveal himself through Gabriel in a cave to a man named Muhammad. If there's a God, he would want to reveal himself. He would want to reveal himself to a guy named Joseph Smith using another angel, Moroni. See how this works?
And if God wanted to reveal himself to us, what would be the best way to do that? It seems to me to be logical that he would reveal himself in a way that we could understand, in a human being like us.
I still don't think he's presented any evidence yet, but he's saying if God would want to reveal himself, he would do it as a human being. He's talking about the incarnation of Jesus, of course. Isn't it interesting that throughout all humanity, like those poor Jews, this Nicky Gumble is a secular, or comes from secular Jews. I would imagine at some point his ancestors believed in Yahweh and so forth. They didn't get to know God, it seems like, because they didn't have Jesus. You need God in the form of a man in order to really know what this God's like. And what about all those other people throughout history who claim to be God in flesh? There's still some people like that walking around today.
So, what is the evidence?
Here we go.
First of all, what is the evidence that Jesus even existed? Some people say, well, maybe Jesus didn't even exist, but there's overwhelming historical evidence. No serious historian would suggest that Jesus didn't exist. We know from evidence outside of the New Testament that Jesus existed.
Okay, the evidence that Christianity is true, that a man rose from the dead, and that God exists, is that a man 2,000 years ago existed? Christians, if you ever listen to this, please stop even mentioning this. You sound idiotic. But I guess it's important to them because if Jesus didn't exist, then Christianity's dead. But that doesn't mean there still could be a God. Yahweh could still be real. I don't understand why Christians hold this up that other people mentioned a guy named Jesus, what was it, 50, 60, 70 years after his purported death?
From historians like Tacitus.
Yes, good point, Ash Smith. 1,000 pine points to you. Why is Mormonism true? Well, first of all, let me present the evidence. Joseph Smith existed. No reputable historian denies that Joseph Smith existed. In fact, any historian who says that Joseph Smith didn't exist, they're a laughing stock. That's my evidence that Mormonism is true. Joseph Smith existed.
And Suetonius, the first century Jewish historian, Josephus, said this, or wrote this about Jesus. He said, there was about this time Jesus, a doer of wonderful works. And he then goes on to talk about the crucifixion of Jesus and his alleged resurrection.
Yeah, this gentleman who is a Jew should have caught on that Josephus uses the word Christ to describe Jesus. And no Jew, who's not a Christian at least, would say that. And Josephus never claimed to be a Christian. So this is why, in fact, if you're a Christian listening and you've been told by your pastor or you've been told by apologists about this great evidence that Jesus existed, which is irrelevant, just Google, type in Josephus forgery, and then just read for like a couple hours all the different links that come up. In the privacy and security of your own home.
So there's evidence outside the New Testament, but most of our evidence comes from inside the New Testament. Now, of course...
I'm glad he admits that. Most of the evidence comes from inside the New Testament. Remember, this is one thing that gets lost in translation. Evidence for what exactly? You got to be really specific. So if Christian says, I have evidence. Evidence for what? Well, evidence that Christianity is true. What exactly about Christianity? What part about Christianity is true? Well, that Jesus rose from the dead. Because that's, I think, the main thing, right? What is your evidence that a man named Jesus rose from the dead in bodily form?
The New Testament was written a long time ago. And people say, how do we know that what we have here hasn't been changed over the years? And the answer is we do know through a science called textual criticism.
Okay, so I think I was sort of right. His first piece of evidence was Josephus. Maybe it was in the back of my mind because I watched this a couple days ago. So if you said extra biblical accounts of his existence, give yourself 1,000 pine points. And his second piece of evidence that Christianity is true is?
And the answer is we do know through a science called textual criticism. Essentially,
Textual criticism.
the way textual criticism works is like this. The more manuscripts that you have, and the earlier they are, the more you can be sure about what the original said. Herodotus...
Okay, yeah. If you're a Christian and you already know I'm an atheist, you're not going to really hear anything I say. But do yourself a favor and type, actually maybe, let me see if I can do this. Type in transcripts for the New Testament in Google. Let's see if this works. You might have to say how many or number of transcripts. Some of you know exactly what I'm trying to find, and I can't find it. Let's see, number transcript, Bible chart. Oh, I'm getting closer. There's one particular one I want to find. I can't find it. But the point that I'm trying to make here is that if you look at the number of manuscripts, oh, that's why it's not working, because I put transcripts instead of manuscripts, is very low. There's hardly any. Here, I found it. Okay. So you see this chart that he put up. Again, safety and comfort of your own home, Christians. You can look this stuff up. Because when you're in a conversation with someone like an atheist, it's not going to be good. Now, this is probably outdated. But look, most of the transcripts or manuscripts that we have for the New Testament come a century after, 1,000 years. I want you to keep that in mind when you hear Mr. Gumble talk. And look at the ones in the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th centuries. Like this is 200 manuscripts. So we got like, I don't know, here maybe 2, 3, 10, 50, maybe 75. It's craziness. I don't understand why Christians still say stuff like this.
And Thucydides were both written in the 5th century BC. Earliest copies we have are 900 AD, so there's a 1300-year gap, and we have only 8 copies of each. Yet no classical scholar would doubt their authenticity.
Even that's false. It's like there's this assumption out there that, oh, historians, they don't doubt any of these other texts, so why should you doubt the Bible? No, historians... There's forgeries in Plutarch's works and so forth. Historians doubt a lot of this stuff. And there's a broader point here that needs to be said. And that is, does the number of manuscripts, mean that it's more likely to be true? If we had half as many manuscripts, is it half as true? If we had double, is it double as true? And his point was, the more you have, the more you can be more confident of what the original said. But that doesn't mean that the originals were true to begin with, right? All this says is that Christianity was popular. One of your pieces of evidence that Christianity is true is that it was popular. It's like, sometimes I just feel like going, douche, 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 like wake up. Someday, probably in the next 50 years, Islam is going to be more popular than Christianity in terms of number of adherents. Does that mean all of a sudden Islam is going to become true? The core propositions? Of course not. Like, I think if you're a younger Christian listening and you hear your pastor or your preacher or apologist in your church starts saying stuff like this, just ask simple questions like, does the number of manuscripts mean that it's more likely to be true? And a smart, honest pastor or apologist is going to say, no, it doesn't. It just means that we can be confident on what, more or less confident on what the earlier one said, or maybe even the original said. But I don't even buy that. And the thing is, historians do not know what the second copy of the Gospel of Mark said. They don't. Why? Because they don't have it. They don't have the third, fourth, fifth. They don't know that the first copy didn't have an error and that the third copy was based only on that first copy. So the second copy is based on the first copy. Like, there could have been a lot of changes in the first copy compared to the original, and we would never know it. Ugh.
Livy's Roman History, 900-year gap, 20 copies. Caesar's Gallic War, 950-year gap, 9 to 10 copies. Tacitus, 1,000-year gap, 20 copies. Then we come to the New Testament, written between 40 and 100 AD. Earliest manuscript, AD 130, 5,309 Greek manuscript.
See, now look at this. Like this, this is like what a used car salesman would do. 5,000 Greek, 10,000 Latin, 9,300 others. But what they're not, this is what he's not showing you. He's not showing this distribution. That's, to me, very dishonest. But the main point is all of this is irrelevant to the veracity, the truthfulness of it all.
Manuscripts, 10,000 Latin, 9,300 others. Totally unique amongst ancient prose writings.
Totally unique. Does something being totally unique make it more likely to be true? There are core propositions, I think, in almost every religion that is totally unique. Does that mean these other religions are true? Of course not. I should be selling these services, and other atheist YouTube channels should be selling these services to Christians to help them be better at being apologists, because this is the problem. Young Christians are investigating some of this stuff on their own, and they're hearing people like Nicky Gumble talk, and going, I'm calling BS on you. Like, I'm a Christian, but I'm hearing you say stuff, and it's like, you might not be outright lying to us, but you're not telling us everything here. And when they do the research for themselves and they find this stuff out, they go, oh, crap, what have I done? I just ate this stuff up, and then they're more likely to leave Christianity. You don't want that, right, apologists? You don't want them to leave Christianity. So start telling the whole truth and nothing but the truth. And to some apologists' credit, they do. Like, I have William Lane Craig on record saying the number of manuscripts has no bearing on whether or not it's true. He'll come out and say that. And I'll say, good for you, William Lane Craig. Spread that news. And popularity doesn't make any difference.
So one of the greatest ever textual critics, F.J.A. Hort, said this: in the variety and fullness of the evidence on which it rests, the text of the New Testament stands absolutely and unapproachably alone amongst ancient prose writings. And no secular historian would disagree with that. So we know from evidence outside and inside the New Testament.
Okay, we know what? So far he's just said that Jesus existed and we have a lot of manuscripts. What do we know from this? I am curious what Nicky Gumble will say.
That Jesus existed. But who is he? We know he was fully human. He had a body, emotions, experiences. But many today would say, yes, he was a human being. We know he existed. Maybe he was a great human being. Maybe
do you hear what's coming here?
He was a great religious teacher. But no more than that. To suggest he was a son of God, to suggest he's God, that's going too far.
So far he's presented no evidence that Christianity is true. The core propositions, which is, I think most would say, the bodily resurrection.
So there are two parts to this argument. First part of the argument is, what did Jesus think about himself?
What did Jesus think about himself? And then you have to take that sentence and change it to, what is it reported that Jesus thought about himself? What is it reported that Jesus said about himself? You can't say, what did Jesus say? Or what did Jesus think about himself? There's a very slight distinction there, but it's a powerful one.
Because if Jesus didn't think that he was God, that's kind of the end of the argument. And even if he did, the second part of the argument is, was he right? So what did Jesus say about himself? The first bit of evidence here is that Jesus' teaching was centered on himself. Great religious teachers point away from themselves. They say, don't look at me, look
So I guess Jesus wasn't a great religious teacher then.
at God. Jesus, who personified humility, said, look at me, come to me.
Is that humble? Saying, follow me, come to me? He was the epitome of humility? Am I being humble when I say, hey, everybody listening, be like me, be like PineCreek? Hey, I know you have a job. I know you got things to do. I know you have a family. Forget all that. Take up your laptop and follow me, because I'm a YouTuber. Is that humble? That's what similar with things what Jesus said.
This question of ultimate meaning and purpose. What is our life about? This sort of sense of what you might call a spiritual hunger. This sense that other things don't
So far, he's presented zero evidence.
quite satisfy. However good these things are, there's always this slight void, this sense something is missing. Jesus said, I am the bread of life. If you want that hunger satisfied, come to me.
Oh, man. What's the name of that guy who claims to be God incarnate? I have a video of him. But yeah, there are people living today who say similar things. And not for 1 second do we believe that they're actually God incarnate.
The stuff in our lives that we don't like. I have stuff in my life I don't like. I have things that, the habits that I find quite addictive. Jesus said, if the Son sets you free, if I set you free, you really will be free.
So is evidence that Jesus was God in flesh and rose from the dead is that he said so?
Then there's all the stuff we carry around. Worry,
That it's written that he said so?
anxiety, fear, guilt. Jesus said, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I'll give you rest. If you want peace of mind, come to me.
If I was a great motivational speaker, I could say the same thing. Come to PineCreek if you're weary and anxious. Come to PineCreek and I will give you rest.
He said, if you receive me, you receive God. If you welcome
And if you truly believe that PineCreek can give you peace and rest, I will take that yoke, that burden. I will lift it off you. Just close your eyes. Imagine PineCreek taking all your cares and worries, burdens. Imagine PineCreek taking that off you. Do you feel it? Do you feel it? Do you feel? You can breathe a little bit easier now, right? Must mean I'm God in flesh.
me, you welcome God. He said, if you have seen me, you have seen God. A little child was drawing a picture of God in the class one time. The teacher said, well, what are you doing? I'm drawing a picture of God. She said, what do you mean? You can't draw a picture of God. Nobody knows what God looks like. So I thought, well, they will do in a minute. Jesus said, if you want to know what God looks like, look at me. If you've seen me, you've seen God. And then there were his indirect claims. Jesus
How is this evidence that any of this is true?
claimed to be able to forgive sins. He went up to people and said, your sins are forgiven. Of course, if someone offends you, you can forgive them.
A lot of Roman Catholic priests say your sins are forgiven. Does that make them God?
But you can't go up to some random person and say, your sins are forgiven. When Jesus did that, the lawyers said, who can forgive sins but God alone?
And Roman Catholic priests.
Forgiveness is at the heart of what Jesus came to do, to make forgiveness possible. It's at the heart of Christianity. C.S. Lewis says a Christian is someone who forgives the inexcusable because God has forgiven the inexcusable.
Remember, I think he's only given 2-3 pieces of evidence. Historians say that Jesus existed. We got a ton of manuscripts. And we have a New Testament saying that Jesus said certain things. And therefore, we can conclude so far, I think, that Jesus rose bodily from the dead. And Christianity is true.
In us. And then there were his direct claims. There's so many of them, but I just We haven't got time to look at them all, but I'd love us to just look at one. If you have a Bible there, you might like to turn to it. John chapter 10, verse 30 to 33. Jesus said this, I and the Father are one.
What do you do with this? How do you communicate with people like this? Because they're coming at this saying, well, with this idea that this is true. And if when Jesus says, I and the Father are one, that means he is God. By the way, there's a lot of Christians who will look at this exact verse in John 10:30 and say, no, that doesn't mean that Jesus is God. What Jesus meant here was that Jesus and God were one in goals and purposes of what he wanted to accomplish here on earth. These are Unitarians I'm describing.
A claim tantamount to a claim to be God was blasphemy in the eyes of the people at the time, and they picked up stones to stone him. Jesus said, I've shown you many great miracles from the Father. From which of these do you stone me? We're not stoning you for any of these, they replied, but for blasphemy, because you, a mere human being, claim to be God.
See, even people back then, claims weren't evidence, or at least not good enough evidence for them, because they didn't believe it. Would they pick up stones and throw them at Jesus if they truly thought that Jesus was God? Or they're trying to kill God? So even 2,000 years ago, claims weren't evidence. It's written, Jesus made a claim. People said, oh, you're claiming this? Guess what? We don't believe you.
I think if you look at all the evidence, it's clear that Jesus did make that claim. It's an astonishing claim. But of course,
the book Gospel of John was written in late first century. Most scholars say there's even evangelical type Christian scholars who will admit that John, the author of John, just made stuff up. A lot of the stuff in the Gospel of John was only said once and not found in the other Gospels. Using the historical method, you should lower your confidence in those claims. Hey, thank you, Endicott, for the donation. Appreciate it.
a claim like that needs to be tested. And really, if you think about it, there are only really three possibilities.
Here it comes.
Either it was not true, and Jesus knew perfectly well it was not true, in which case he was a fraudster, or else it was not true, and he just simply didn't realize it was not true. He genuinely thought he was God, in which case he was deluded, or we would say insane. But logically, there is only really one other possibility, and that is that it's true.
Yeah, this is called the C.S. Lewis Trilemma argument, liar, lunatic, or Lord. This was often said in the Sunday school classes I went to, and I accepted it like a baby accepts pablum when I was young. When I got older, though, it's amazing how many Christian teachers will say it exactly the way this guy just said it. He said, there's really only one other option, and that is Jesus is Lord. And little PineCreek, well, actually I wasn't little at the time, I was married. I raised my hand and said, well, wait a minute, let's be intellectually honest with ourselves. There is another option, and the option is that, yeah, Jesus existed, he had disciples, all this stuff, but another option here is that Jesus never made these types of claims to begin with. And an author, decades later, claimed that Jesus made these claims. Just said that Jesus said these things, when really Jesus didn't say these things. Why is that not a reasonable option? It's not a reasonable option to say in a Sunday school class, and I tell you, I had so many dirty looks when I said this. I says like, because basically what I was saying is, the Bible's not reliable. Maybe that's an option. The Bible's not reliable. Maybe some things are true and some things are false. Isn't that reasonable? But you can't go there with many Christians. You just can't go there. Now, here's another problem with the trilemma argument. Even if you just assume there's only those three options, and that is, how many people on the planet are habitual liars or just lie even about important stuff purposely? They're liars. How many people on the planet would you say are like that? It's not insubstantial, right? There are people with problems who just lie to make themselves more special or whatever. There are probably millions of people on this planet who are like that. I'm not just talking about telling white lies once in a while. I'm talking about major lies. And they do it. Some people call those people politicians. So, okay, so if you agree with, if you're a Christian, you agree with me, yeah, there's probably millions of people who lie about important stuff. And then how many people on this planet are crazy, are lunatics? It's not a small number. It's probably, we've got 7 billion people on the planet right now. Wouldn't it be in the millions that are certifiably insane, that have been diagnosed as having multiple personalities or whatever? Just cuckoo. Millions, right? Hundreds of millions. Now, how many people on this planet are Lord? In order to accept the Trilemma argument from C.S. Lewis, you have to say it's more probable that someone is actually God in flesh rather than a liar or a lunatic, which we have millions of examples of. Probably even in that time period, 2,000 years ago, there's at least hundreds of thousands of liars and lunatics walking around. How do you say that, oh, but this is the one case where it's Lord? Like, that is the most stupidest thing I've ever heard. You have to be really bad at math to accept that. Because we're putting these things in the denominator. It's like, here's a person named Jesus. Okay, what's the probability he's crazy? Well, we got about 190,000 crazy people in the world. He could be one of them. How many are liars? Oh, there's 300,000 liars in the world at least. Well, Jesus could be one of them. How many God incarnate people do we have in the world? Well, we got Joe down the street. We got Myron next door. He claimed to be God once. And then we got like a few other messiahs because they thought they were fulfilling Daniel 9. So what are we up to, a dozen? It's like, and you still think it's more probable that Jesus was Lord. Now, I don't think you have to even go there with liar, lunatic, or Lord. You can just say, well, this is a story. This is, if he did make these types of claims, and there's, like I said, there's even Christians who don't believe that he was God in flesh. These were written decades later and could have easily just been made up.
C.S. Lewis, one of the intellectual giants of the 20th century, and of course best known as the author of the Chronicles of Narnia, said this: a man who was merely a man and said the sort of things Jesus said would not be a great moral teacher. He'd either be insane or else he'd be the devil of hell. You must make your choice. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else insane or something worse. But let's not come up with any patronizing nonsense about his being a great human teacher. He has not left that open to us.
Right. This is what I love about the C.S. Lewis quote, is that C.S. Lewis is saying that if Jesus was not God in flesh, he is evil. He is horrible. He is like the devil of hell. Why? Because he's saying, I can take your sins. I can forgive you, even though you hurt Bob down the street. I forgive you for what you did to Bob. It's like C.S. Lewis rightly recognized that the actions that is claimed that Jesus said and did are evil. But if God does it, it's okay.
He did not intend to. So, the second part of the argument. Was he right in what he said about himself? What's the
Okay, are we getting closer to having evidence that this is true?
evidence to support his claims? Here's the first piece of evidence, his teaching. The teaching of Jesus is widely acknowledged to be the greatest teaching of all time.
Oh, okay, let's hear him out.
Love your neighbor as
Love your neighbor
yourself.
as yourself. Oh, wow. It's like nobody before Jesus could come up with that. It's like, it has to be God if he says, love your neighbor as yourself. Like, how can you say such a thing without being God in flesh?
Do to other people as you would have them do to you. And then this, totally revolutionary. The first person to say this.
Whoa, here's a claim. First person to say what?
Love your enemy.
Are you sure about that? I wonder if I seem to remember some Eastern religions that are very pacifistic sects of Hinduism that might have said something like that. Someone in the live stream chat can tell me if I'm wrong about this. But if it were true, Nicky Gumble, that someone before Jesus said, love your enemies, are you done? Are you going to leave Christianity? Is this... And how in the heck does any of these unique special sayings make Jesus more likely to be a deity in flesh?
Jesus' teaching has been the foundation of our entire civilization in the West. Many of our laws were originally founded on the teaching of Jesus. We've advanced in every field of science and technology. Think how much we've advanced in the last 10 years in science and technology. Yet in 2,000 years, no one has ever improved on the moral teaching of Jesus.
In 2,000 years, no one has ever improved on the moral teaching of Jesus. He believes Jesus is God. He believes that God, I think, commanded the stoning of homosexuals. Jesus commanded the stoning of homosexuals, practicing homosexuals. No one could ever improve. Now, keep that in mind. If you're a Trinitarian listening who believes Jesus truly is God in flesh, don't give me this old covenant, new covenant garbage. We're talking about Jesus is God. God is Jesus. God commanded things in the past. Of course, he would never command them again. But in the past, he did this. Now listen to what he's saying here.
Yet in 2,000 years, no one has ever improved on the moral teaching of Jesus. They're the greatest words ever spoken. They're the kind of words you'd expect.
And yet he just quoted C.S. Lewis, who's basically called Jesus evil if he wasn't God, for taking upon the trespasses of others whom he didn't offend. What's the word? Gratuitous fatuity or something like this? C.S. Lewis called the actions of Jesus. How in the world is Jesus, like in 2,000 years, you can't improve on the morality of Jesus? When guys like C.S. Lewis says, look, this is evil. But if he's God, then it's okay.
God to speak. So the first piece of evidence is teaching. Secondly, his...
You know what's interesting? I'm noticing some comments in the live stream chat. A lot of atheists in the live stream chat are being really mean to Nicky Gumble right now. But I want to say this. Most of what this guy is saying, the other YouTube Christians who I often critique, they believe a lot of this stuff. They believe Jesus claimed to be the one with the Father. They believe that manuscript stuff. They believe that Jesus was a great moral teacher. And the thing is, they try to use philosophy and all these arguments to try to, in my opinion, cover up that they're basically this guy who's trying to present evidence that Christianity is true and brings up, oh, he existed. Oh, Christianity was popular. Oh, decades later, there was claims made about him. And oh, he couldn't be a liar. Oh, he couldn't be a lunatic. Oh, he must be God. Oh, and he said some great things that nobody else could have ever said before that. Like, I'm telling you, a lot of these YouTube Christians, they believe and say a lot of the same stuff. Why do I say this? I say this to say that don't be extra hard on this guy, because he actually represents a huge chunk of Christianity who just eat this stuff up.
Life, what he did. I thought Christianity was boring. I thought Jesus would be a bore. I thought Jesus would be the kind of person who would turn wine into water. I was amazed to read of Jesus going to a party. It would have been such fun to be with Jesus. Went to a party, the wine ran out. He said, go and get those jars, fill them with bath water, and start pouring it out for the guests. And they started pouring it out. And out came Chateau Lafite 45, BC, that is. Not just his miracles, but his love for the marginalized, feeding the hungry, healing the sick. and ultimately laying down his life for us.
Yeah, see, this is the beauty of Christianity. Christianity is it's almost the antithesis of Judaism in this particular area. If you read the Old Testament, what does Yahweh command to do with lepers and people with, diseases, and they basically made them outcasts. Even a woman on her menstrual period, what does Yahweh say? Don't touch her. She's unclean. Put them outside the gates and so forth. Now, some people in Judaism were feeling a little uneasy about this. That's not fair. They're people too. Why are we putting them outside the gates and treating them like they're unclean and all this sort of thing? And so, in my opinion, it was some Jews out of the Essene movement come along and say, and I think Jesus was out of the Essene movement, come along and say, oh no, we're going to flip that and say, God really wants you inside the gates, not outside the gates. And so this is why you have these stories of so many of the miracle stories in the New Testament. In fact, I think the first one was having to do with a leper, right? In the Gospel of Mark? I forget. And a lot of it has to do with the Samaritan woman and the woman who bled for 12 years, symbolism, and the 12-year-old girl who died. It's like the purpose of the story in the New Testament was to flip the Old Testament laws on its head.
Jesus said, greater love has no one than this, than lay down his life for his friends. And then his character has impressed millions of people who wouldn't call themselves Christians. Time magazine described Jesus as the most persistent symbol of purity, selflessness, and love.
Remember, we're talking, this whole video is supposed to be evidence that Christianity is true. And he's mentioning Time magazine's calling Jesus great. Like I tell you, Nicky Gumble needs to meet my buddy Myron. He is so good, so great. My Myron's so great, so strong and so mighty.
In the history of humanity, his enemies could find no fault. And his friends, who knew him really well, said, this guy's without sin. I often think the real test of character is when we're under pressure. And Jesus, when he was being tortured, said about his torturers,
we don't have a lot of stuff on Jesus. I think if you were to read all the claims about Jesus's ministry, his life, what he said, what he did, I think you could read it. Someone, like so many minutes worth. I think it's like 22 minutes. You could put it in a sitcom. One sitcom episode is basically all we know about the life teachings of Jesus. And we don't have all the other stuff, like we do, for example, with Joseph Smith, all his shortcomings and failings and so forth. Can you imagine if we could go back in a time machine and if that data existed? But of course, we don't want to put that in canon, right? We don't want to put that in the Bible. And Christians can't even fathom that idea. I tell you, the Christianity I came from, they can't even entertain that idea for 1 second that Jesus might have had a dark side or that he actually might have sinned. Because if they admit that there could be dirt on Jesus like there is on Joseph Smith and it just wasn't preserved, it's over for them. They're done, right?
Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing.
Hey,
And
well,
then it's fulfillment of prophecy. No one else in the history of the world has had a whole collection of books written about them before they were born. Jesus fulfilled over 300 prophecies, 29 of them in a single day.
okay, this is probably the first real piece of evidence he's given, in my opinion. And it's prophecies. I thought, hey, that's pretty good. Because it's like a model of, I predict such and such will happen. And if it does, then we can build our confidence that whatever that's based on is true.
Well, you might say, maybe he got hold of the Old Testament, he read all these prophecies, and he thought, right, I better go around fulfilling all of these.
Yeah, he's so close. He's so close. It's maybe Jesus didn't do most of that stuff, and then later authors reinterpreted the Old Testament as a template for the New Testament and penned in that Jesus did these things to fulfill prophecy. In fact, if you read the Gospel of Matthew, if you're a Christian listening, there's clues in there that this is made up, and that is they'll say the author of Matthew will come out and say, this was written or this was done to fulfill the prophecy of X. He'll just come out and say that. It's almost like he's not even hiding it.
The problem about that is the sheer number of them, and humanly speaking, he had no control. The exact manner of his death was prophesied.
False. The exact manner of his death was prophesied. Is the word crucifixion? I know exactly what he's thinking. He's thinking about Isaiah 53. Is the word crucifixion or cross in Isaiah 53? No. Is the idea of... Now, here's how the prophecy could have been made better in Isaiah 53. If Isaiah 53 said there will be a man who will be in front of the governing authorities, for example, Pontius Pilate, and we'll have a conversation. Pontius Pilate will say that he is innocent, but the Jews will condemn him. He will be crucified. He will be on a cross for 3 hours. And after the 3 hours, he will die, and there will be a huge earthquake. The sky will go dark, and dead people will come out of the graves. Now, that would be a great Isaiah 53 prophecy. And keep in mind, Isaiah 53 says none of that. But that, according to the New Testament, happened. But it wasn't prophesied to have happened. That would be very specific. Like, how do you fake people coming out of the graves and Pilate talking to this guy? Like, Pilate wasn't even born then yet.
The place of his burial, his resurrection. Even the place of his birth was prophesied. I'm supposed to be born in Bethlehem. It's too late.
Maybe Jesus wasn't born in Bethlehem at all. They just said he was in order to fulfill prophecy. I think Christians get this, but they just can't accept it. They get it. They understand what I'm saying, but they just say, no, that there's just too much. There's no way that, no, come on, Doug. There's no way that they just penciled all that in. Really? You sure? The authors of the New Testament probably were very well read in the Old Testament. I'm not saying they penciled in Jesus the man, but I'm saying they penciled in Jesus the Christ.
And then his conquest of death. This is the cornerstone of Christianity.
Okay, yeah, what's the evidence for that?
It's so relevant to every single person here. Because, statistically speaking, 1 in 1 die. There was a headline in The Onion, the satirical magazine, world death rate holding steady at 100%. That's the reality.
So he's using appeal to emotion, fear of death.
You know, the Victorians used to talk a lot about death, but they never talked about sex. We talk a lot about sex, but we don't talk about death. It's kind of just...
Here's the evidence for the resurrection. Death is scary.
Something you don't mention. Even in hospitals now, they try to avoid using the word death. I heard of one hospital where they said you must never use the word death. They had a politically correct way of describing it. Negative patient care outcome. But people die nevertheless. And when you go to a funeral and the coffin goes into the ground, and it is, unless death has been conquered.
I'm fearful of death. I don't want to be fearful of death. I desire death to be conquered. Therefore, Christianity is true. This is what I'm hearing. And if you're a Christian listening, I think I'm resonating with you. You hear it too, right? Can you hear what he's doing? But this is no evidence that it's true.
Unless, when Jesus died and was buried, he was raised to life. If he was, then there's hope beyond this life.
Even if he wasn't, there could be Yahweh could be real. Christianity could be false. There could be some type of eternal life. And Christianity is false. That's another thing that I remember when I was a Christian, that would be foreign to me if someone said that to me in my early 20s. It's like, what? You're saying there could be a heaven and maybe even a hell, and that Yahweh and the Old Testament is true, and yet Christianity is false? What are you? This is nonsense. It's all in the Bible, so
But is it just wishful thinking? It is, unless there's evidence. What is
Okay, what is the evidence?
the evidence for the resurrection of Jesus? First of all, his absence from the tomb. No one has ever satisfactorily explained why Jesus' body was not there the first Easter day.
Oh, the tomb was empty, so that means it happened, right? Well, my ancestor, my great grandfather, he could fly unaided. Seriously, Christians, you realize he could? And no one to this date, I'm telling you the truth, listen, no one to this date has successfully explained that the spot where he flew from was found empty. He was there, he flew, and the spot where he flew from was empty. Now, if he didn't fly, all they would have to go to is that spot from which he flew and produced his body. But nobody to this date has done that. Therefore, my ancestor, the flying man, really flew unaided. Now, if you're a Christian and you're listening to this and you're laughing, please know this is how a lot of non-Christians view this apologetic. They view it the same way. The only reason why you believe there was a tomb to begin with is because documents say so, written decades after the purported event, saying that he was placed in a tomb. And a lot of people say that Joseph of Arimathea was made up in order to fulfill purposely, in other words, pen it in, Isaiah 53, they'd be buried among the rich.
People have come up with all that sort of explanation. The authorities stole the body. Well, in that case, why didn't they produce it when everyone was saying that Jesus had been seen? They couldn't.
Yeah, I always like to bring up John the Baptist because in the Gospels itself, Herod believed that Jesus was John the Baptist risen from the dead. And yet no one went to and they knew where John the Baptist was buried according to the story. To this day, no one has produced the body of John the Baptist. How do you explain that? John the Baptist must have risen from the dead. They could have produced the body of John the Baptist, but they didn't. Hey, thank you, B. Guzman. Applebee's Early Bird Special, baby. Hey, yeah, good idea.
Find this piece of evidence fascinating. That when the disciples heard that Jesus had been raised from the dead, they ran to the tomb. And when they got to the tomb, they looked in, and what they found...
Yeah, women at the tomb, embarrassing, so therefore it's probably true. Never found the body, so therefore it's probably true. I'm going to bring up something that Cam Spires has come up with, which is brilliant. And I want you guys to spread this around as much as possible to other Christians. I actually think it's brilliant. But you got to phrase it the right way. I did it on Twitter, and I think I got it right. But why don't we have any records? This is how you ask the question. Why don't we have any records of Jesus doing stuff at the age of 80? What best explains that? What best explains that we have no information of Jesus doing stuff when he was... Actually, the 80's too high. Change that. Let's make it 50. No, let's make it even better. 40. Okay, so this is what you do. Go up to a Christian sometime later today and ask them, why don't we have any records, any data, any texts saying the stuff Jesus did when he was 40 years old? And what are they going to say? He wasn't on earth when he was 40 years old. I mean, he ascended into heaven. Well, what best explains this? What best explains that we have nothing about Jesus when he was 40? That he ascended into heaven, into the clouds? Or that he was never resurrected to begin with? Which is more reasonable? And the point of this thought experiment that Cam Spires came up with is that you have to be pretty darn sure that Jesus ascended. In fact, the ascension of Jesus is linked tightly to the resurrection of Jesus. Because if Jesus did not resurrect, if Jesus did resurrect, then he would have had to have ascended as well. Otherwise, we would have records of what Jesus said and did when he was 40. Maybe. You see that? How tightly they linked? And the brilliance of what Cam came up with here is that the ascension of Jesus is a poorly attested, it's not even close to what Habermas would say is a minimal fact. But if you can't have good evidence for the ascension of Jesus, then your resurrection story is dead in the water. Because then we should have records of Jesus, what he said, all the miracles he would have done when he was 35, 38, 40, 45. And what best explains this is that Jesus never did rise from the dead to begin with. This is why we don't have records of him being 40 and doing stuff. Or you could be right, and he did go above sea level. Foot by foot he rose. Just imagine this. This is another thing. The disciples who watched Jesus ascend into heaven, they literally could have laid on their backs and Jesus would have hovered over them, and they could have seen the bottom of Jesus' feet as he went up. Why did he go up? Because apparently that's where heaven is. Okay, I've had enough of Nicky Gumble. So this is from the Alpha website, YouTube channel. Yes, Stan Edwards, you got it. So what would it take? What kind of evidence would I need in order to believe Christianity is true? Or at least have my confidence raised? Great question. The answer is, raise my favorite uncle and my sister from the dead in the name of Jesus. There's precedent for it. Jesus did it. It says in the New Testament that you do the things that Jesus will do, and even greater things that Jesus did if you're a follower of Christ. Or something simple, I'll believe Christianity is true, or my confidence will be raised that I'll believe it if you take a napkin, soak it in water under James Randi test conditions, pray in the name of Jesus that they'll be lit in fire and consumed, like it says in 1 Kings 18. Christians hate that type of answer because they know, or they believe, that will never happen. They want you to believe because of manuscripts. Christians want you to believe because Christianity was popular. They want you to believe because it gives you hope, meaning, and purpose. They don't want you to believe because of 1 Kings 18 or because of a miracle like someone rising from the dead today. Because they don't believe it will happen. I am convinced that most Christians don't believe the stuff that Craig Keener has written in his book. Maybe I won't say most, but a lot. They just don't believe it. David 22585, 1,000 pine points to you. I'm going to pray that your hairline is lowered 2 inches by the end of the show. Will that do? Yes. In the name of Jesus, give me a full head of hair, fuller than this guy's. I'm waiting. Wait a minute. I'm feeling something on my forehead. Wait a minute. It's getting thicker. Oh my goodness. This is amazing. You guys see this? Look at this. It's a full 2 inches lower. I can't believe this. Unbelievable. My confidence in Jesus. Wow. I'm handsome again.